Well, shalom, shalom. Welcome, welcome, world changers. And thank you, Hannah, for the music. That was beautiful. That was beautiful. That was beautiful. Okay, so tonight we are getting into Genesis 39. I'm going to read from the Legends of the Jews a little bit before that, but we're going to get into Genesis chapter 39 and compare the manuscripts, talking about when Joseph was sold as a slave in Egypt. All right, so if any of you have any questions, comments, prayer requests, feel free to drop those in the live chat, especially questions in regards to the things that we have been reading or the Genesis series, anything in that regard. All right, so as always, I pray that everything that we share here today would be a great blessing to you, increase your knowledge of the scriptures, your knowledge of the things of heaven, your relationship with God, and your knowledge of the truth. Amen, amen, amen. So, let's see what we have here in the live chat before we get into it. Calamento says shalom to all. Billy says shalom, shalom, shalom. Welcome. Blessings to y'all and your families. So, let's get into this. This is, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to read a little bit from the Legends of the Jews just before we get into Genesis 39. Basically just to catch up to where we are. Because Genesis chapter 39 is about Joseph and Potiphar's wife. And there is a little bit here in the Legends of the Jews to read before we get to that. So let's do that, and then we'll get into the canonical scriptures, Genesis chapter 39. Seek the Lord says shalom. Shalom, seek the Lord. Welcome and blessings to you and your family. Okay, so I'm reading from Legends of the Jews on the right-hand side of your screen for those of you who are watching the video. And this is Volume 2, Chapter 1. And this is a subtitled part of this chapter, subtitled The Wives of the Sons of Jacob. It says, Judah was the first of the sons of Jacob to enter wedlock. After the sale of Joseph to the Midianites, his brothers had said to Judah, "If conditions were as before, our father would provide wives for us now. As it is, he is entirely absorbed in his grief for Joseph, and we must look about for wives ourselves. You are our chief, and you should marry first." Judah's marriage with Alit, the daughter of the noble merchant Shua, which was consummated at Adullam, the residence of his friend Hira, or as he called later Hiram, king of Tyre, was not happy. His two oldest sons died, and shortly thereafter his wife also. It was Judah's punishment for having begun a good deed and left it unfinished. For, quote, "He who begins a good deed and does not execute it to the end brings down misfortune upon his own head," unquote. Judah had rescued Joseph from death, but it was his suggestion to sell him into slavery. Had he urged them to restore the lad to his father, his brothers would have obeyed his words. He was lacking in constancy to persist until he completed the work of Joseph's deliverance, which he had begun. In the same year, the year of Joseph's misfortune, all his other brothers married too. Reuben's wife was named Elioram, the daughter of the Canaanite Uzzi of Timnah. Simon married his sister Dinah first, and then a second wife. Then Simon and Levi massacred the men of Shechem. Dinah refused to leave the city and follow her brothers, saying, Where shall I carry my shame?" But Simon swore he would marry her, as he did later. And when she died in Egypt, he took her body to the Holy Land and buried it there. Dinah bore her brother a son, and from her union with Shechem, the son of Hamor, sprang a daughter, Asenath by name, afterward the wife of Joseph. When this daughter was born to Dinah, her brothers, the sons of Jacob, wanted to kill her, that the finger of men might not point at the fruit of sin in their father's house. But Jacob took a piece of tin, inscribed the holy name upon it, and bound it about the neck of the girl. And he put it under a thorn bush, and abandoned her there. An angel carried the babe down to Egypt, where Potiphar adopted her as his child, for his wife was barren. Years thereafter, when Joseph traveled through the land as viceroy, the maidens threw gifts at him to make him turn his eyes in their direction and give them the opportunity of gazing upon his beauty. Asenath possessed nothing that would do as a present. Therefore, she took off the amulet suspended from her neck and gave it to him. Thus, Joseph became acquainted with her lineage, and he married her, seeing that she was not an Egyptian, but connected with the house of Jacob through her mother. Beside the son of Dinah, Simon had another son, whose name was Saul, by Abunah, the damsel he had taken captive in the campaign against Shechem. Now this is something very extraordinary. Never heard of this before. Never heard about Simon or Simeon committing this kind of act before. So again, this is the Legends of the Jews, taken from all kinds of various sources, and I'm not sure how accurate or historical this would be. Nothing says, hi, how are you? Hello, Nothing. Blessings multiplied to you. How are you doing? It continues here. The Legends of the Jews continues to say, Levi and Issachar married two daughters of Jobab, the grandson of Aber. The wife of the former was named Adinah, the wife of the latter Arida. Dan's wife was Elphalet, a daughter of the Moabite Hamudan. For a long time their marriage remained childless. Finally, they had a son, whom they called Hushim. Gad and Naphtali married women from Haran, two sisters, daughters of Amoram, a grandson of Nahor. Naphtali's wife, Merimit, was the older of the two, and the younger, the wife of Gad, was named Uzit. Asher's first wife was Adon, the daughter of Aphlal, the grandson of Ishmael. She died childless, and he married a second wife, Hadorah, the daughter of Abimael, the grandson of Shem. She had been married before, her first husband having been Malkiel, also a grandson of Shem, and the issue of this first marriage was a daughter, Sarah by name. When Asher brought his wife to Canaan, the 3-year-old orphan Sarah came with him. She was raised in the house of Jacob and walked in the way of pious children, and God gave her beauty, wisdom, and sagacity. Zebulun's wife was Maroshah, the daughter of Molad, a grandson of Midian, the son of Abraham by Keturah. For Benjamin, when he was but 10 years old, Jacob took Maliah to wife, the daughter of Aram, the grandson of Terah, and she bore him 5 sons. At the age of 18, he married a second wife, Arbat, the daughter of Zimron, a son of Abraham by Keturah, and by her also he had 5 sons. Okay, so here we are at our place here right now, Joseph, the slave of Potiphar. So I'm going to read Genesis chapter 39 and compare the manuscripts as I promised that I would. Genesis chapter 39, and we got also the Targum as well, and Vulgate and such. Let's do this. Verse 1. Genesis chapter 39, verse 1. I'm reading this time from the WEB. This is the World English Bible, and this Bible is based upon the Masoretic text. It says, Joseph was brought down to Egypt. Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the hand of the Ishmaelites that had brought him down there. Septuagint says, and Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Petiphares, the eunuch of Pharaoh. Notice it says eunuch of Pharaoh as opposed to officer of Pharaoh in the Masoretic. As the captain of the guard in the Septuagint, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites who brought him down there. The Syriac, this is again the Aramaic translation of an ancient Hebrew text, says, and the Midianites took Joseph down to Egypt. And the Midianites took Joseph down to Egypt. And Potiphar, the eunuch, again says eunuch here. So far there are two manuscripts against one, i.e. the Septuagint and the Syriac against the Masoretic. I say against the Masoretic because the Masoretic does not say eunuch, at least not in this translation. Let's have a peek at the other Bible translations just to have a peek at the different. Does anybody actually say eunuch? Does any of the Bible translations actually say eunuch? Let's have a peek. King James says officer. New King James, of course, officer. Officer for the NLT, the NIV, Pharaoh's officials, ESV, officer, CSB, officer, NASB, officer, NASB, LSB, official of Pharaoh, amplified, officer, NET, official of Pharaoh, RSV, officer, ASV, officer. So, I think the reason why they all say officer here is because they're all based upon the Masoretic text. But again, we have the Syriac and the Septuagint says eunuch. Eunuch. As the Septuagint would say, the eunuch of Pharaoh. So the Syriac says, and the Midianites took Joseph down to Egypt, and Potiphar the eunuch, high guard of Pharaoh, an Egyptian man, bought him from the hands of the Arabs who brought him down there. And look at the differences here. The Masoretic simply says Joseph was brought down to Egypt. Doesn't say who brought him there. It just says that he was brought down. But the Syriac makes it very clear. The Midianites took Joseph down to Egypt. Okay, that's the first difference. The next one, of course, is what we're talking about. The Masoretic says officer, whereas the Syriac says eunuch. Potiphar was the eunuch. And another big one is the Masoretic says the Ishmaelites brought him down there. And the Syriac says the Arabs brought him down there. That's a difference. There's say a little bit of difference there between Ishmaelites and Arabs. I would expect the Targum here to be very much like the Masoretic. Let's have a look at it. Targum says, Joseph was brought down to Egypt. He was purchased by Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the chief of the slaughterers. So it says chief of the slaughterers here. It doesn't say that in the Masoretic text. That's an Egyptian from the Ishmaelites. Look at this. In brackets it says Arabs who brought him down there. So this leads some credence to the Syriac that actually says Arabs instead of Ishmaelites. So the Targum kind of ties the Masoretic together with the Syriac in this portion. The Latin Vulgate. And Joseph was brought into Egypt, and Potiphar, and again this one says a eunuch of Pharaoh, chief captain of the army, an Egyptian, bought him of the Ishmaelites, by whom he was brought. And finally, the Samaritan text, the old Samaritan text, says, and Joseph had been pulled down to Mizrima, which would be a variation of Mitzrayim, which is the Hebrew name for Egypt. And it says here, Futephar, Footeefaar, Futephar, a Mizri, Misree, a Mizri officer of Pharaoh, the executions minister. Now again, this has not just captain of the guard, but specifically executions minister, which is very much like, that would have been like, let's have a look here. The Targum, right? Because the Targum says, chief of the slaughterers. Chief of the slaughterers. So the Samaritan, which was a much older text, would say, says executions minister, bought him from the hand of the Yismaelims, who had pulled him down there. Nothing asks the question, do you know why Jesus wore a crown of thorns? Well, this is off topic. Nothing. I'm not going to do what most Christians do. I know that Christians they got their own, like a lot of Christians have their own idea, and they have their own claim, and they make a statement, an emphatic statement that they know exactly why he wore a crown of thorns. I don't think anybody, I mean, everybody's got their own theories, okay? It could have been just as an instrument of torture. I know that Christians say, well, the thorns represent sin, and sin because that's what was the curse. It was the curse on the land, and now the curse is on Jesus. I understand that, but at the end of the day, Mr. Nothing, it doesn't tell us explicitly why. We can talk about symbolism and figures of speech and the reasons why possibly it doesn't say why. And I don't think anybody can say 100% for sure why, because they can't read anybody else's mind. And it's very difficult to say exactly why they chose that. We can go into all the different figures of speech and such like that, and symbolism and all that kind of stuff, and that's another topic. But Nothing. Thank you for your question, but I do kindly ask you to let's try to keep the questions on the actual topic of the night. We're in the middle of a special series called the Genesis series, and we're reading here about Joseph. If you have any questions specifically about the stories that we're reading, or anything surrounding these stories, or anything to do with this, that would be wonderful, and I would appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, let's do verse 2 here. Genesis 39, verse 2. Yahweh was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. He was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now, of course, it says here Yahweh instead of the Lord. because this is the WEB translation. The WEB says that kind of stuff, uses that kind of protocol, if you will. The Septuagint says, and the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. And he was in the house with his lord the Egyptian. The Syriac says, and Lord Jehovah was with Joseph, as he was a prosperous man in the house of his lord the Egyptian. The Targum says the word of Adonai, or Adonai. The word of Adonai was with Yosef, Joseph's support, and he was successful. He was a servant in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now this is different, right? So it doesn't say literally, the Lord or Adonai. It doesn't just simply say Adonai was with Yosef, but it says the word of Adonai. The word of the Lord was with Yosef. Latin says, and the Lord was with him. Again, see, the Latin is always, the Vulgate, it seems to be a little bit more loosely translated. And the Lord was with him, it says, and he was a prosperous man in all things, and he dwelt in his master's house. The Samaritan says, and Shema was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was over the house of his master, the Mizri. He was over the house of his master. Now that's a whole lot different than any of the other texts, because the other text says that he was just simply in the house of his master, right? So again, looking at this, the Masoretic, he was in the house of his master. The Septuagint, he was in the house with his Lord. Syriac, he was in the house of his Lord. Targum, he was in the house of his master. The Latin Vulgate, he dwelt in his master's house. But the Samaritan says he was over the house of his master, the Mitzri. Like he had authority. He had authority in that house. Kubert says, Shalom. Shalom, Kuberts. Welcome. Blessings, blessings multiplied to you. Okay, verse 3 says, his master saw that Yahweh was with him, and that Yahweh made all that he did prosper in his hand. Well, that's a good thing. If your boss, or those who you work with, or those who you live with, see that Yahweh is with you, that's a really good thing, isn't it? And that you prosper in all that you do. Okay, verse 3. In the Septuagint, it says, and his master knew that the Lord was with him, and the Lord prospers in his hands whatsoever he happens to do. Syriac says, and his Lord saw the Lord Jehovah was with him, and the Lord Jehovah prospered everything that he did with his hands. Targum says his master saw that the word of Adonai was with him, supported him, and that whatever he did, Adonai made it succeed through his hand. That's awesome. I am very intrigued on how the other manuscripts just say the Lord was with him, Yahweh's with him. But here it says the word of Adonai was with him. Craig says, Shalom, family, blessings. Shalom, shalom, Craig, blessings multiplied to you and your family. Hope all is well. The Vulgate says, who knew very well that the Lord was with him and made all that he did to prosper in his hand. Okay. The Samaritan says, and his master saw that Shema was with him, and that Shema made all that he did to prosper in his hand. Okay. Verse 4. Masoretic. This is the WEB translation from the Masoretic. Joseph found favor in his sight. He ministered to him, and Potiphar made him overseer over his house and all that he had put into his hand. Septuagint. And Joseph found grace in the presence of his Lord. So grace instead of favor. It says, and was well pleasing to him. Instead of he ministered to him, well pleasing to him. It says, and he set him over his house. Okay, instead of naming, like the Masoretic says, Potiphar made him overseer over his house. The Septuagint says, and all that he had, he gave into the hand of Joseph. Syriac says, and Joseph found favor in his eyes, and he served him, and he authorized him over his house, and everything that he had, he gave into his hands. Targum. From the time he appointed him supervisor over his house. Oh, wait, excuse me. Skipped one here. Joseph found favor in his eyes, and he served him personally. He appointed him supervisor over his household, and all that he possessed he placed in his hand. Vulgate. And Joseph found favor in the sight of his master, and he ministered to him. And being set over all by him, he governed the house committed to him, and all things were delivered to him. Okay, verse 5 from the WEB, the Masoretic. A little bit of a longer verse. From the time he made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, Yahweh blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. Yahweh's blessing was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Septuagint. And it came to pass, after he was set over his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the house of the Egyptian for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was on all his possessions in the house and in the field. It's very important to have someone that's a righteous man living within the general vicinity of you anyway, living with you, or working with you, or all that kind of stuff. Syriac says, verse 5, and it was from the time that he authorized him over his house and over everything that he had, Lord Jehovah blessed the house of the Egyptian because of Joseph. And the blessing of Lord Jehovah was in everything that he had in the house and in the field. Targum says, from the time he appointed him supervisor over his household and over all that he possessed, Adonai blessed the house of the Egyptian for Joseph's sake. The blessing of Adonai was in all that he possessed in the house and in the field. Latin Vulgate. And the Lord blessed the house of the Egyptian for Joseph's sake, and multiplied all his substance, both at home and in the fields. And the Samaritan says that it came about from that time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he owned. And Shema blessed the Mizri house on account of Yosef. Thus Shema's blessing was upon all that he owned in the field, or in the house and in the field. Okay. Verse 6, W.E.B. from the Masoretic says, he left all that he had in Joseph's hand. He didn't concern himself with anything except for the food which he ate. Joseph was well built and handsome. Septuagint, and he committed all that he had into the hands of Joseph, and he knew not anything that belonged to him, save the bread which he himself ate. And Joseph was handsome in form and exceedingly beautiful in countenance. Syriac says, and he left everything that he had in the hand of Joseph, and he did not know anything that he had with him but the bread that he was eating. And Joseph was handsome in his appearance, and his face was attractive. Targum, he left everything he possessed in the hand of Joseph. He did not concern himself with anything about him except for the bread he ate. Joseph was well built and good looking. Vulgate, neither knew he any other thing but bread which he ate, and Joseph was of a beautiful countenance and comely to behold. And the Samaritan, and he left everything he owned into Joseph's hand, and with him he did not concern himself with anything except the bread which he ate. And Joseph was handsome in form and good looking. Okay. Verse 7, W.E.B. from the Masoretic says, after these things, his master's wife set her eyes on Joseph, and she said, lie with me. So this would be Potiphar's wife. But it says, it doesn't say in the Masoretic, but it says in the Septuagint, in the Syriac, and I think it's even here as well, right? It says, the Septuagint in the Syriac anyway, that Potiphar was a eunuch. So I know we had, I think it was Stephanie there the other night that asked, how could Potiphar be a eunuch if he was married? And then we were kind of like brainstorming about this, like, how can this be possible? Is it possible? And, we said, well, I think it was Stephanie that said, maybe that could explain why Potiphar's wife wanted Joseph so bad, because her husband really wasn't a husband per se if he was a eunuch, right? So he didn't fulfill the husband duties as typical husbands would. So in that case, that could make sense, right? Then we can understand a little bit more why Potiphar's wife was so desperate, if you will. Okay, and she wasn't satisfied with Potiphar being a eunuch, so that's why she is doing. This is what she's doing here. So the Septuagint says here in verse 7, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph and said, lie with me. Syriac says, and after. Now, it was after these matters, the wife of his Lord set her eyes on Joseph, and she said to him, lie with me. Targum says, after these events, his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, be with me. And Latin Vulgate says, after many days, his mistress cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me. And finally, the Samaritan says, and it came about after these events that his master's wife lifted up her eyes at Joseph, and she said, lie with me. Okay, verse 8, Masoretic, but he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, my master doesn't know what is with me in the house, and he has put all that he has into my hand. Verse 9, no one is greater in this house than I am, and he has not kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Septuagint says, but he would not. But he said to his master's wife, if because of me my master knows nothing in his house, and has given into my hands all things that belong to him, and in this house there is nothing above me, nor has anything been kept back from me, but you, because you are his wife, how then should I do this wicked thing and sin against God? Syriac says, and he did not want to, and he said to the wife of his Lord, behold, my Lord does not know what is with me in his house, and everything that he has authorized into my hands. And there is none greater in this house than I. And not he has spared anything but you, for you are his wife. And how shall I do this great evil and sin against God? Targum says, he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, my master knows nothing about what I am doing in the house, and all that he possess he has placed in my hands. No one in this house is greater than me. He has not withheld anything from me other than you, for you are his wife. How can I do this great evil and sin against or before God? Vulgate. But he in no wise consented to that wicked act, said to her, but he, in no wise consenting to that wicked act, said to her, behold, my master has delivered all things to me, and knows not what he has in his own house. Neither is there anything which is not in my power, or that he has not delivered to me, but you, who are his wife. How then can I do this wicked thing and sin against my God? Hubert says, this great evil. Well, we know how Yah feels about infidelity. Yes. Yes. Yeah, so Joseph here is, he is walking in the ways of righteousness, being the Siddiq that he is, and he's calling this out, and he is resisting this evil. Yes, definitely. Thank you, Cuberts. Okay, verse 10. WEB, based on the Masoretic, it says, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, he didn't listen to her, to lie by her, or to be with her. About this time he went into the house to do his work, and there were none of the men of the house inside. She caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. He left his garment in her hand and ran outside. Septuagint. And when she talked with Joseph day by day, he hearkened not to her to sleep with her, so as to be with her. It came to pass on a certain day that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was no one of the household within. And she caught hold of him by his clothes, and said, lie with me. And having left his clothes in her hands, he fled and went forth. Syriac says, and as she was speaking to him every day, and he was not listening to her, to lie with her and to be with her, it was on one of the days, and Joseph entered the house to do work, and there was no man of the men of the house there in the house, and she caught him by his garment, and she said to him, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hands, and escaping, he went out to the street. Okay, verse 10 of the Targum says, even though she spoke to Yosef every day, he would not listen to obey her, to lie next to her, nor to be with her. And it was on such a day that he came to the house to do his work, examine the recordings of his accounts. No man of the household was there in the house. She grabbed him by his garment, saying, "Be with me." He left his garment in her hand and fled, and went outside to the marketplace. Now again, see, we got more details here than we have in the canonical scriptures. Okay, the Vulgate says, with such words as these, day by day, both woman was importunate with the young man, and he refused the adultery. Now it happened on a certain day that Joseph went into the house and was doing some business without any man with him. And she, catching the skirt of his garment, said, "Lie with me." But he, leaving the garment in her hand, fled and went out. And the Samaritan says, it came about when she spoke to Yosef day by day, he did not listen to her, to lie beside her, being with her. And it happened the other day, and Yosef went into the house to do his work in the house, and none of the men of the house were there inside the house. And she caught him by his garments, plural, garments, saying, "Lie with me." And he left his garments in her hand and fled and went outside. Hud said, "Hey, I just started a channel about the Bible. So excited. Blessings, Hud. Blessings, Hud. And may the Lord bless you with a lot of knowledge and encouragement, and to encourage your peers as well, Hud. Thank you for sharing. Awesome stuff. All right. Genesis chapter 39, verse 13 from the WEB, the Masoretic, says, when she saw that he left his garment in her hand and had run outside, she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, "Behold, he was brought a Hebrew into us to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. When he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment by me and ran outside." Septuagint says, when it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his clothes in her hands and fled and gone forth, that she called those that were in the house and spoke to them, saying, "See, he has brought in to us a Hebrew servant to mock us. He came in to me, saying, 'Lie with me,' and I cried with a loud voice. And when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, having left his clothes with me, he fled and went forth out." Syriac. And it was that when she saw that he left his garment in her hands and fled to the street, she called to the men of her house, and she said to them, "See that he brought to us the Hebrew servant to mock at us. He came in against me to lie with me, and I cried out in a loud voice. And when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment with me and fled, so he went out to the street." Targum says, and it was when she saw that he left his garment in her hand and had fled outside to the marketplace. Again, we got that extra detail in there, to the marketplace, that she called to the men of the household and said to them, "See, he brought us a Hebrew man to mock us. He came to be with me, and I called out in a loud voice. When he heard that I raised my voice and cried out, he left his garment with me and fled and went outside to the marketplace." Vulgate And when the woman saw that the garment was in her hands and herself disregarded, she called to the men of her house and said to them, "See, he has brought in a Hebrew to abuse us. He came in to me to lie with me, and when I cried out, he heard my voice. He left the garment that I held and got him out." Samaritan says, "And it came about when she saw that he left his garments," again plural here, "in her hand, and had fled and gone outside. And she called to the men of her house and said to them, See, he has brought in an Ibri man to us to make sport of us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I screamed. And it came about when he heard that I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garments," plural again, "in my hands, and fled and went outside." Okay, verse 16, 17, 18. Masoretic. She laid up his garment by her until his master came home. She spoke to him according to these words, saying, quote, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought to us came in to me to mock me. And I lifted up my voice and cried. He left his garment by me and ran outside." Notice that that's this word mock. It reminds me of where it talks about like Ishmael mocking Isaac. Because certain translation says Ishmael mocked Isaac. Others say Ishmael played with Isaac. Or made sport with Isaac. So interesting that this word mock is in there. I have a hunch that this word mock encapsulates a lot of meaning. Septuagint, verse 16. So she leaves the clothes by her until the master came to his house. And she spoke to him according to these words, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you brought in to us came in to mock me, and said to me, I will lie with you. And when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, having left his clothes with me, he fled and departed forth." Syriac says, "And she laid his garment with her until his Lord came into the house. And she said to him, according to these words, the Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came in against me to mock at us. And when I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment in my hands and fled. He went out to the street." Targum says, "She laid his garment near her until his master came home. She spoke to him," that her husband, "according to these words, saying, the Hebrew slave came to me, the one that you brought into us. He came to mock me. When I raised my voice and cried out, he left his garment with me and fled outside to the marketplace." Vulgate says, "For a proof, therefore, of her fidelity, she kept the garment and showed it to her husband when he returned home." Now, notice it adds this in here. For a proof, therefore, of her fidelity. That's not found in the other manuscripts, as far as I remember. That's not found in the other manuscripts, is it? Doesn't say for proof. Doesn't say for a proof there, or in the Septuagint. Nope. Or in the Syriac. Nope. But it does in the Vulgate. Verse 17, "And said, the Hebrew servant whom you have brought came to me to abuse me. And when he heard me cry, he left the garment which I held and fled out." Samaritan says, "And she left his garments," again plural, "beside her until his master came home." So far it's only the Vulgate that adds this. It has this extra thing in there about, for proof of her fidelity. Everything else does not include that. Verse 17 of the Samaritan says, she spoke to him with these words, saying, the Ibri slave whom you brought to us came in to me to make sport of me. Again, here we are, this word sport. In other places is mock. Verse 18, and it came about, as I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garments beside me and fled outside. Verse 19, Masoretic text. When his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, this is what your servant did to me, his wrath was kindled. Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in custody. But Yahweh was with Joseph and showed kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Now, you got to wonder why God even allowed that to happen in the first place. If Yahweh was with him, why was Joseph thrown into prison? Wouldn't it make a little bit more sense to say that Joseph was not thrown into prison and he gained his master's favor, and he told the story about how he's innocent and his master believed him because Yahweh was with him, and therefore he didn't even have to go to prison. But here it says that Yahweh was with him even though he did go to prison. With him in prison even. Okay, Septuagint says, and it came to pass when his master heard all the words of his wife, that she spoke to him, saying, thus did your servant to me, that he was very angry. And his master took Joseph and cast him into the prison, into the place where the king's prisoners are kept, there in the prison. And the Lord was with Joseph and poured down mercy upon him, and he gave him favor in the sight of the chief keeper of the prison. Syriac says, and when his Lord heard the words of his wife, that she had told him, according to these words your servant did to me, his anger was inflamed. And his Lord took him and threw him into prison, where the prisoners of the king were bound, and he was there in the prison. And Lord Jehovah was with Joseph, and cast favor over him, and he gave him affection in the eyes of the chief of the prison. So it's not like God always keeps you out of those kind of places, or the darkness, if you will. But in the darkness, you can be, you can find favor, because God is with you. Targum says, when his master heard the words of his wife, which he spoke to him, saying, your slave did such things to me, he became furious. Joseph's master took him and appointed him over the prison. Appointed him over the prison. The place where the king's prisoners were jailed. He remained there in prison. The word of Adonai was with Joseph's support, and extended kindness to him, granting him favor in the eyes of the prison chief. Latin. His master, hearing these things and giving too much credit to his wife's words, again, look at that, adding those kind of, it's almost like a paraphrase, doesn't it? The Vulgate. It doesn't seem to be very literal in its translation. Either that, or it's using a manuscript that has all these other extras to it. So again, his master, hearing these things and giving too much credit to his wife's words, was very angry, and cast Joseph into the prison where the king's prisoners were kept, and he was there shut up. But the Lord was with Joseph, and having mercy upon him, gave him favor in the sight of the chief keeper of the prison. Okay. 2 more verses here, then we'll jump into the legends of the Jews. Genesis chapter 39, verse 22 and 23. It says, the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Well, that's what it looks like when the Lord's with you in a prison, you know? I see here, Chipmunk says, maybe him in prison was a form of extra protection from the other stuff that could have happened. Very good. Like no pregnancy from her affecting bloodline. Hey, that's very good thinking there, Chipmunk. Reminds me of, how some people look at something to be more negative, but it could be. I'm just saying, could be more of a positive thing. It reminds me of what it says in Isaiah chapter 57 when it talks about some of the good dying young. I do believe that the good people are blessed with long life, generally speaking, but there are some that do die young, and it says in Isaiah 57 that it's like, why do they die young? Like, no one understands why. How can somebody so good? How can somebody so righteous? How can God's man or God's woman die so young? And the answer was, the answer is to keep them from the evil to come. To spare them from the evil to come. God took them home, basically. And so, I think this is the same kind of concept what you're talking about here, Chipmunk. Something that may seem to be more negative, but maybe it's not that negative. Maybe it is to keep him from something that could have happened. Thank you, Chipmunk. It's an awesome observation, as always. Going Nowhere says, hey, I was busy watching cartoons, but I'm here now. Well, it's good that you're here. It's good that you're here, Going Nowhere. All right. Good to see ya. Okay, so all right. Again, the Masoretic, verse 22 and 23. The keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, he was responsible for it. It's a good thing to take responsibility, right? To voluntarily assume responsibility upon yourself. It's a good thing. You get repaid. It's a good thing. So verse 23 says, the next verse, the keeper of the prison didn't look after anything that was under his hand, because Yahweh was with him, and that which he did, Yahweh made it prosper. Septuagint says in verse 22, and the chief keeper of the prison gave the prison into the hand of Joseph and all the prisoners, as many as were in the prison. And all things whatsoever they do there, he did them. Verse 23, because of him, the chief keeper of the prison knew nothing. Now, this stands out to me very, very much. You might say, Christopher, what are you talking about now? Well, I have to make a note of this because this is so powerful. I'll explain this in just give me a second here. So, this word "new," I don't think it means what we think it means today. I don't think, because Today when we say, did you know this, or she knew this, and he knew this, or he knew that, we all know what that means today, right? It means, whether they're aware of it, that they know about it in their mind, right? They have the information in their head, basically. I don't think this is what this means, because of two different things here. Number one is, in the ancient, in archaic English, this word "knew" is used in the Old King James for intimate relations between man and a woman. He knew her, right? So it's talking about literally hands-on, knowing, not just simple, not just in your mind kind of knowing, right? Literal, intimate, hands-on involvement. Okay, so I do believe that's what this means here. It doesn't mean just knowing in your head, because I think the prison chief knew, being chief, he'd know. I mean, at least mentally speaking, he would know what's going on, right? So he's the chief, he's there, Who knows, back in those days, he probably pretty much lived there. He would know what's going on there, mentally speaking. But because Joseph was put in charge of everything, the prison chief would not be intimately involved, hands-on, physical, hard work kind of involvement with everything, because Joseph was his man. Joseph was the one that he put in charge, and he kind of he was like the overseer. So this word "knew," I'm gonna touch on something very, very important in just a second here, guys. This word "knew," I believe this word "knew" means intimate, hands-on involvement. To be involved in an intimate, hands-on way. So the prison chief did not have to be intimately involved in the affairs of the prison. He didn't have to get down, roll up his sleeves, and get dirty, so to speak, because Joseph was there doing the job for him. Not that he didn't know about it in a mental way, but he didn't know about it in a practical way. You know what I'm saying? Practical way. Like Adam knew Eve in a practical way, you say? So, it says in Ecclesiastes that the dead know nothing. Okay? Now, I know that there are people who read that and they take it in, like, it's really a bad way of interpreting scripture. You read it through the lens of a 20th or 21st century, English Westerner. So you say, oh, the dead know nothing. That means they don't know anything. That means they're soul sleeping, or that they don't exist, or or whatever the case is. I don't believe that's the case, because we have other things in scripture that talk about the dead, the afterworld, the next world, everything from Lazarus and the rich man in Luke chapter 16, and the souls of those who cry out for justice in the book of Revelation, the souls of those who are beheaded, the people who are crying out to God, who have perished in the iniquity of the Nephilim in the days of Noah, as it says in the book of Enoch, and this is why God answered their prayers and sent the flood. We have Samuel coming and speaking from the afterlife in the scriptures, and many other things as well. Okay, we have Jonah, we have in the days of, we have the Psalms that also talk about the afterlife. So then we have Ecclesiastes that says the dead know nothing. So there's two ways to go. I think there's three ways to go about it. Number one is to, just interpret it in a way that a lot of, in my estimation, shallow interpreters do today. It's like, well, that means the dead know nothing, means they know nothing. So they use the word know or knew. They read it through our modern lens, and they think it just means head knowledge. I don't think so. So that's one way of interpreting it. Another way of interpreting it is, well, you can say what's wrong. The author of Ecclesiastes missed it there. Okay? Another way of interpreting it is that the author of Ecclesiastes, when he said the dead know nothing, what he meant was, when a person passes away, they are no longer intimately, hands-on, physically, practically involved in this world anymore. So they may know about what's going on in mentally speaking, in their soul, but they don't know what's going on in the sense of being intimate, hands-on, practical, roll up your sleeves work, kind of, carnal, material work. Just like this means, that it says again in verse 23 of the Septuagint, because of him, the chief keeper of the prison knew nothing. So again, I don't believe this is talking about mental knowledge. I think this is talking about practical knowledge. The prison chief did not have to get, boots on the ground, so to speak, in the prison, because Joseph was already there doing it for him. Not that he didn't mentally know about it. He just didn't practically, intimately, hands-on, personally get involved in it like that. Yeah, so this speaks to me volumes, this word here. Anyways, so it says, the keeper of the prison knew nothing, for all things were in the hand of Joseph, because the Lord was with him. And whatever things he did, the Lord made him to prosper in his hands. Syriac says, and the chief of the prisoners, this is verse 22, and the chief of the prisoners delivered into the hand of Joseph all the prisoners that were in the prison and everything that they were doing there, for he was the bondsman. So different, saying he was the bondsman as opposed to he was responsible for it in the Masoretic text, or he did to them. So the Septuagint puts it in kind of like a hybrid way. Verse 23 of the Syriac, and the chief of the prisoners did not see anything in his hand. So that's what I mean. This is what I think that... So in other words, the chief of the prisoner did not see anything in his hand. In other words, he was not intimately involved in it. He wasn't actually doing the work. Not that he didn't know about it in his head, but rather he wasn't down in the trenches, so to speak, doing the work like Joseph was. Joseph was doing the work, but the chief of the prisoners didn't know anything. Again, intimate, hands-on, practical involvement. That's how I interpret it. That's how I see it. It says, because the Lord Jehovah was with him, and the Lord Jehovah prospered everything that he was doing. Okay, let's see what the Targum has to say about this. It says, the prison chief gave or appointed Yosef to be in control over all the prisoners in the prison, and everything that had to be done there. He was the one who did it. It was done by his word. Interesting how the Targums put a lot of emphasis on the word, right? Verse 23. The prison chief did not have to look after anything that was under or see any offense committed by his hand, because the word of Adonai was with him, his support, in whatever he did. Adonai made him succeed. Vulgate, who delivered into his hand all the prisoners that were kept in custody, and whatever was done was under him. Verse 23, neither did he himself know anything, having committed all things to him, for the Lord was with him, and made all that he did to prosper. Samaritan says, Now this is interesting. I missed the verse 21 here. I missed that here, because in verse 21 in the Samaritan it says, and Shammah was with Joseph, and Ya'at was kind to him, and gave him the favor in the eyes of the jail minister. Ya'at. In the footnotes it says Ya'at means angel, according to the Israelite Samaritan tradition. So Ya'at, the angel of the Lord, was with him, kind to him. So to read it all in context, verse 21 says here, and Shammah was with Joseph, and his angel was kind to him, and gave him the favor in the eyes of the jail minister. And the jail minister committed to Joseph's hand all the imprisoned who were in jail, and whatever was done there, he was the doer of it. The jail minister did not supervise anything under his hand, because Shammah was with him, and everything that he did, Shammah made to prosper. Wow. Okay. Wow. All right. So let's see what. Let's give me a second here. Let's see what the Legends of the Jews has to say about this. And I can see that it has to say a lot about this. There's a lot of material here. Joseph, the slave of Potiphar. It says, when Joseph was sold as a slave to the Ishmaelites, he kept silent out of respect for his brothers, and did not tell his masters that he was the son of Jacob, a great and powerful man. Now that is super powerful, because that's consistent with the canonical scriptures. Because in the scriptures we have no record of Joseph, mumbling or grumbling or complaining or ratting out his brothers. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you know what my brothers did to me? They beat me up and threw me into a pit and pretty much killed me and left me for dead. And so in the scriptures we have nothing about that. He said nothing of the sort. And here in the Legends of the Jews tells us why. It was out of respect for his brothers. So he, through all of the injustice that he suffered, he was still humble enough to take it and to trust God and to treat his brothers with kindness as much as they treated him with hatred. It's the humility of Joseph we see here. The humility of Joseph. Again, when Joseph was sold as a slave to the Ishmaelites, he kept silence out of respect for his brothers, and did not tell his masters that he was the son of Jacob, a great and powerful man. Even when he came to the Midianites with the Ishmaelites, and the former asked after his parentage, he still said he was a slave, in order not to put his brothers to shame. Wow. After all that his brothers did, he still supported them. He still had their back. He still stuck up for them. He still covered their butt, if you will. He still did that, all for his brothers. It says, but the most distinguished of the Midianites rebuked Joseph, saying, you are no slave. Your appearance betrays you. And he threatened him with death unless he acknowledged the truth. Joseph, however, was steadfast. He would not act treacherously toward his brothers. Arrived in Egypt, the owners of Joseph could come to no agreement regarding him. Each desired to have sole and exclusive possession of him. They therefore decided to leave him with a shopkeeper. They therefore decided to leave him with a shopkeeper until they should come back to Egypt again with their merchandise. And God let Joseph find grace in the sight of the shopkeeper. All that he had, his whole house, he put into Joseph's hand, and therefore the Lord blessed him with much silver and gold, and Joseph remained with him for 3 months and 5 days. At that time there came from Memphis the wife of Potiphar, and she cast her eyes upon Joseph, of whose comeliness of person she had heard from the eunuchs. She told her husband how that a certain shopkeeper had grown rich through a young Hebrew, and she added, quote, "But it is said that the youth was stolen away out of the land of Canaan. Go, therefore, and sit in judgment upon his owner, and take the youth unto your house, that the God of the Hebrews may bless you, for the grace of heaven rests upon the youth." Potiphar summoned the shopkeeper, and when he appeared before him, he spoke harshly to him, saying, quote, "What is this I hear? That you steal souls from the land of Canaan and carry on traffic with them?" Unquote. The shopkeeper protested his innocence, and he could not be made to recede from his assertion that a company of Ishmaelites had left Joseph in his charge temporarily until they should return. Potiphar had him stripped naked and beaten, but he continued to reiterate the same statement. Then Potiphar summoned Joseph. The youth prostrated himself before this chief of the eunuchs, for he was third in rank of the officers of Pharaoh. And he addressed Pharaoh and said, quote, "Are you a slave or a free man, or a freeborn man?" And Joseph replied, "A slave." Potiphar continued to question him. "Whose slave are you?" Joseph said, "I belong to the Ishmaelites." Potiphar said, "How were you made a slave?" Joseph said, "They bought me in the land of Canaan." But Potiphar refused to give credence to what he said, and he had also him stripped and beaten. The wife of Potiphar, standing by the door, saw how Joseph was abused, and she sent word to her husband, "Your verdict is unjust, for you punish the freeborn youth that was stolen away from his place as though he were one that had committed a crime." As Joseph held firmly to what he had said, Potiphar ordered him to prison until his masters should return. In her sinful longing for him, his wife wanted to have Joseph in her own house, and she remonstrated with her husband in these words, quote, "Why do you keep the captive, nobly born slave a prisoner? You should rather set him at liberty and have him serve you." Unquote. He answered, "The law of the Egyptians does not permit us to take what belongs to another before all titles are made clear." And Joseph stayed in prison for 24 days until the return of the Ishmaelites to Egypt. Meanwhile, they had heard somewhere that Joseph was the son of Jacob, and they therefore said to him, "Why did you pretend that you were a slave? See, we have information that you are the son of a powerful man in Canaan, and your father mourns for you in sackcloth." Joseph was on the point of divulging his secret, but he kept a check upon himself for the sake of his brothers, and he repeated that he was a slave. Nevertheless, the Ishmaelites decided to sell him, that he be not found in their hands, for they feared the revenge of Jacob, who, they knew, was in high favor with the Lord and with men. The shopkeeper begged the Ishmaelites to rescue him from the legal prosecution of Potiphar and clear him of the suspicion of man theft. The Ishmaelites in turn had a conference with Joseph and bade him testify before Pharaoh that they had bought him for money. He did so, and the chief of the eunuchs liberated him from prison and dismissed all parties concerned. With the permission of her husband, Potiphar's wife sent a eunuch to the Ishmaelites, bidding him to buy Joseph. But he returned and reported that they demanded an exorbitant price for the slave. She dispatched a second eunuch, charging him to conclude the bargain. And though they asked 1 mina of gold or even 2, he was not to be sparing of money. He was to be sure to buy the slave and bring him to her. The eunuch gave the Ishmaelites 80 pieces of gold for Joseph, telling his mistress, however, that he had paid out 100 pieces. Joseph noticed the deception, but he kept silent, that the eunuch might not be put to shame. Notice how Joseph is like sticking up for everybody here. He doesn't want anybody to be exposed. You notice this? Moving on, it says, thus Joseph became the slave of the idolatrous priest Potiphar, or Potipharah, as he was sometimes called. He had secured possession of the handsome youth for a lewd purpose, but the angel Gabriel mutilated him in such a manner that he could not accomplish it. So maybe that's why we have the other manuscripts, the Septuagint and the Syriac, saying that Potiphar was a eunuch. See, we get so much more detail here. It goes on to say, his master soon had occasion to notice that Joseph was as pious as he was beautiful. For whenever he was occupied with his ministrations, he would whisper a prayer, O Lord of the world, you are my trust, you are my protection. Let me find grace and favor in your sight, and in the sight of all that see me, and in the sight of my master Potiphar. When Potiphar noticed the movement of his lips, he said to Joseph, do you propose to cast a spell upon me? No, replied the youth. I am beseeching God to let me find favor in your eyes. Notice here, this is just like the story of Hannah, right? When Hannah was praying, she moved her lips. Even though she wasn't praying out super loud, Eli saw Hannah, she was moving her lips. Here, Joseph was moving her lips. So it wasn't a thought prayer. Even though I do believe that God can hear thought prayers, I think it's very important to verbalize a prayer when you can. In other words, when you can whisper a prayer or say a prayer, something to do with actually moving your lips, I think it's important that we do that. You know, when the disciples asked Yeshua, teach us how to pray, what did Yeshua say? He said, when you pray, say, our Father. You know, so he didn't say when you pray, think it. He said when you pray, say it. So I think it's important. I do believe and I do know that there are times when you cannot say it. There may be some circumstances that you can't actually move your lips even. But so in that circumstance, I do believe God would hear and answer those kind of thought prayers. But I think it's important that that if we can actually say a prayer, to say it. At least whisper it. Okay, so continuing here with the Legends of the Jews, it says his prayer was heard. Potiphar convinced himself that God was with Joseph. Sometimes he would make a test of Joseph's miraculous powers. If he brought him a glass of hypocris, he would say, I would rather have wine mixed with absinthe. And straightway the spiced wine was changed into bitter wine. Whenever he desired, he could be sure to get from Joseph, and he saw clearly that God fulfilled the wishes of his slave. Therefore he put all the keys of his house into his hand, and he knew not anything that was with him, keeping back nothing from Joseph but his wife, seeing that the Shekinah rested upon him, or the Shekinah. Potiphar treated Joseph not as a slave, but as a member of his family, for he said, "This youth is not cut out for a slave's work. He is worthy of a prince's place." Accordingly, he provided instruction for him in the arts, and ordered him to have better fare than the other slaves. Joseph thanked God for his new and happy state. He prayed, "Blessed art thou, O Lord, that you have caused me to forget my father's house." Unquote. What made his present fortune so agreeable was that he was removed from the envy and jealousy of his brothers. He said, "When I was in my father's house, and he gave me something pretty, my brothers begrudged me the present. And now, O Lord, I thank you that I live amid plenty." Unquote. Free from anxieties, he turned his attention to his external appearance. He painted his eyes, dressed his hair, and aimed to be elegant in his walk. But God spake to him, saying, "Your father is mourning in sackcloth and ashes, while you eat, drink, and dress your hair. Therefore I will stir up your mistress against you, and you shall be embarrassed." Thus Joseph's secret wish was fulfilled, that he might be permitted to prove his piety under temptation, as the piety of his fathers had been tested. Wow. So another question answered here. Why did God allow this whole thing to happen between Potiphar's wife and Joseph? Joseph was not concerned about his father in mourning at that time, but he was basically living it up in the palace. So that, according to this text here, that's the reason why Joseph suffered at the hands of Potiphar's wife. Let's continue with the next section here. John says, what does Shekinah mean, or Shekinah? Typically speaking, Shekinah is talking about the glory of God, the manifest presence of God, the glory of God, that kind of thing. So Moses on Mount Sinai, for example, the cloud in the day, the fire by night, the glory of God appears. This is what is typically what's meant by Shekinah. Yeah, thank you for your question, John. Appreciate that. Next section, Joseph and Zuleika. Quote, "Throw the stick up in the air. It will always return to its original place." Like Rachel, his mother, Joseph was of ravishing beauty, and the wife of his master was filled with invincible passion for him. Her feeling was heightened by astrologic forecast that she was destined to have descendants through Joseph. This was true, but not in the sense in which she understood the prophecy. Joseph married her daughter Asenath later on, and she bore him children. Now this even brings more understanding to the story, right? So this is it's not like she's just some super wicked woman, like super wicked woman. No, she did what she did because she thought it was God's will, because of the prophecy that she heard that she was to have descendants through Joseph, but she didn't fully understand the prophecy that it was supposed to be through her daughter, not through her. So she thought it was supposed to be through her, according to this. So it says, Joseph married her daughter Asenath later on, and she bore him children, thus fulfilling what had been read in the stars. In the beginning, she did not confess her love to Joseph. She tried first to seduce him by artifice. On the pretext of visiting him, she would go to him at night, and as she had no sons, she would pretend a desire to adopt him. Joseph then prayed to God in her behalf, and she bore a son. However, she continued to embrace him as though he were her own child. Yet he did not notice her evil designs. Finally, when he recognized her wanton trickery, he mourned many days and endeavored to turn her away from her sinful passion by the word of God. She, on her side, often threatened him with death and surrendered him to castigations in order to make him amenable to her will. And when these means had no effect upon Joseph, she sought to seduce him with enticements. She would say, quote, I promise you, you shall rule over me and all that I have, if you will but give yourself up to me, and you shall be to me the same as my lawful husband. But Joseph was mindful of the words of his fathers, and he went to his chamber and fasted and prayed to God that he would deliver him from the toils of the Egyptian woman. In spite of the mortifications he practiced, and though he gave to the poor and the sick the food apportioned to him, his master thought he lived in a luxurious life. For those that fast for the glory of God are made beautiful of countenance. The wife of Potiphar would frequently speak to her husband in praise of Joseph's chastity in order that he might conceive no suspicion of the state of her feelings. And again, she would encourage Joseph secretly, telling him not to fear her husband, that she was convinced of his purity of life. And though one should carry tales to him about Joseph and herself, Potiphar would lend him no credence. And when she saw that all this was influential, she approached him with the request that he teach her the word of God, saying, quote, If it be your wish that I forsake idol worship, then fulfill my desire, and I will persuade that Egyptian husband of mine to abjure the idols, and we shall walk in the law of your God. Unquote. Joseph replied, The Lord desires not that those who fear him shall walk in impurity, nor has he pleasure in the adulterer. Unquote. Another time she came to him and said, quote, If you will not do my desire, I will murder the Egyptian and wed you according to the law. Whereat Joseph rent his garment and he said, O woman, fear the Lord, and do not execute this evil deed, that you may not bring destruction down upon yourself. For I will proclaim your impious purposes to all in the public. Again, she sent a dish prepared with magic spells, by means of which she hoped to get him into her power. But when the eunuch set it before him, he saw the image of a man handing him a sword together with the dish, and warned by the vision, he took good care not to taste of the food. A few days later, his mistress came to him and asked him why he had not eaten of what she had sent him. He reproached her, saying, How could you tell me? I do not come near unto the idols, but only unto the Lord. The God of my fathers has revealed your iniquity to me through an angel, but that you may know that the malice of the wicked has no power over those who fear God in purity, I shall eat your food before your eyes, and the God of my fathers and the angel of Abraham will be with me. Unquote. The wife of Potiphar fell upon her face at the feet of Joseph, and amid tears she promised not to commit this sin again. But her unholy passion for Joseph did not depart from her, and her distress over her unfulfilled wish made her look so ill that her husband said to her, "Why is your countenance fallen?" And she said, "I have a pain at my heart, and the groanings of my spirit oppress me." Once when she was alone with Joseph, she rushed towards him, crying, "I will throttle myself, or I will jump into a well or a pit if you will not yield yourself to me." Noticing her extreme agitation, Joseph endeavored to calm her with these words: "Remember, if you make away with yourself, your husband's concubine, Ashteho, your rival, will maltreat your children and extirpate your memory from the earth." These words, gently spoken, had the opposite effect than intended. They only inflamed her passion the more by feeding her hopes. She said, "There, you see, you do love me now. It's sufficient for me that you take thought for me and for the safety of my children. I expect now that my desire will be fulfilled." Unquote. She did not know that Joseph spoke as he did for the sake of God and not for her sake. His mistress, or as she was called, Zuleika, pursued him day after day with her amorous talk and her flattery, saying, "How fair is your appearance, how comely your form. Never have I seen so well favored a slave as you are." Joseph would reply, "God, who formed me in my mother's womb, has created all men." Zuleika said, "How beautiful are your eyes, with which you have charmed all Egyptians, both men and women." Joseph said, "Beautiful as they may be while I am alive, so ghastly they will be to look upon in the grave." Zuleika said, "How lovely and pleasant are your words. I pray, take your harp, play it also and sing, that I may hear your words." Joseph said, "Lovely and pleasant are my words when I proclaim the praise of my God." Zuleika said, "How beautiful is your hair. Take my golden comb and comb it." Joseph said, "How long will you continue to speak thus to me? Leave off. It were better for you to care for your household." Zuleika, "There is nothing in my house that I care for, only you." But Joseph's virtue was unshaken. While she spoke thus, he did not so much as raise his eyes to look at his mistress. He remained equally steadfast while she lavished gifts upon him, for she provided him with garments of one kind for the morning, another for noon, and a third kind for the evening. Nor could threats move him. She would say, "I will bring false accusations against you before your master." And Joseph would reply, "The Lord executes judgment for the oppressed." Or, "I will deprive you of food." Whereupon Joseph said, "The Lord gives food to the hungry." Or, "I will have you thrown in prison." Whereupon Joseph said, "The Lord looses the prisoners." Or, "I will put heavy labor upon you that will bend you double." Whereupon Joseph says, "The Lord raises up them that are bowed down." Or, quote, "I will blind the eyes. I will blind your eyes." Whereupon Joseph says, "The Lord opens the eyes of the blind." When she began to exercise her blandishments upon him, he rejected them with the words, "I fear my master." But Zuleika would say, "I will kill him." Joseph replied with indignation, "Not enough that you would make an adulterer of me. You want to have me be a murderer besides?" And he spoke furthermore, saying, "I fear the Lord my God." Zuleika says, "Nonsense! He's not here to see you." Joseph says, "Great is the Lord and highly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable." Thereupon she took Joseph into her chamber, where an idol hung above the bed. This she covered, that it might not be a witness of what she said or what she was about to do. Joseph said, though you cover up the eyes of the idol, remember the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth. Yes, continued Joseph, I have many reasons not to do this thing for the sake of God. Adam was banished from paradise on account of violating a light command. How much more should I have to fear the punishment of God were I to commit so grave a sin as adultery? The Lord is in the habit of choosing a favorite member of our family as a sacrifice unto himself. Perhaps he desires to make choice of me, but if I do your will, I make myself unfit to be a sacrifice unto God. Also, the Lord is in the habit of appearing suddenly in the visions of the night unto those that love him. Thus he did appear to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I fear that he may appear unto me at the very moment while I am defiling myself with you. And as I fear God, so I fear my father, who withdrew the birthright from his firstborn Reuben on account of an immoral act and gave it to me. Were I to fulfill your desire, I would share the fate of my brother Reuben. I noticed something here that I think is a really great, very, very great. It says that Joseph refused to defile himself because he was a sacrifice unto God. And that reminds me of today's evangelical Christianity. It's like, just come as you are. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to repent. You don't have to do it. Just come as you are. No, you repent. You clean yourself up as much as you possibly can within all the power. Use all the power within your being to clean yourself up first, so that you can be a fit sacrifice to God. Then you can surrender to God and say, "Hey, this is my sacrifice. I am a living sacrifice," even as Paul would say. Going Nowhere said, Joseph must have been quite a looker. He must have been quite the handsome man, that's for sure. Going Nowhere. Thanks, Going Nowhere. Kubert says, I wonder if God put this desire in her heart as a test to Joseph. Yeah. It seems that's probably the case, Kuberts. I think that's probably the case. Awesome stuff. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Kuberts. With such words, Joseph endeavored to cure the wife of his master of the wanton passion she had conceived for him, while he took heed to keep far from a heinous sin, not from fear of the punishment that would follow, nor out of consideration for the opinion of men, but because he desired to sanctify the name of God, blessed be he, before the whole world. It was this feeling of his that Zuleika could not comprehend, and when finally carried away by passion, she told him in unmistakable language what she desired, and he recoiled from her and said to her, why do you refuse to fulfill my wish? Excuse me. She said to Joseph, why do you refuse to fulfill my wish? Am I not a married woman? None will find out what you have done. Joseph replied, if the unmarried women of the heathen are prohibited unto us, how much more their married women? As the Lord lives, I will not commit the crime you bid me to do. In this, Joseph followed the example of many pious men who utter an oath at the moment when they are in danger of succumbing to temptation, and seek thus to gather moral courage to control their evil instincts. When Zuleika could not prevail upon him to persuade him, her desire threw her into a grievous sickness, and all the women of Egypt came to visit her, and they said unto her, quote, Why are you so languid and wasted? You that lack nothing, is not your husband a prince, great and esteemed in the sight of the king? It is possible that you can want anything of what your heart desires. Zuleika answered them, saying, This day shall it be made known unto you from where comes the state wherein you see me. She commanded her maidservants to prepare food for all the women, and she spread a banquet before them in her house. She placed knives upon the table and to peel the oranges, and then ordered Joseph to appear, arrayed in costly garments, and wait upon her guests. When Joseph came in, the women could not take their eyes off him, and they all cut their hands with the knives, and the oranges in their hands were covered with blood. But they, not knowing what they were doing, continued to look upon the beauty of Joseph without turning their eyes away from him. Then Zuleika said unto them, What have you done? Behold, I set oranges before you to eat, and you have cut your hands. All the women looked at their hands, and lo, they were full of blood, and it flowed down and stained their garments. They said to Zuleika, This slave is in your house, did enchant us. This slave in your house did enchant us, and we could not turn our eyes away from him on account of his beauty. She said then, This happened to you that looked upon him but a moment, and you could not refrain yourselves. How then can I control myself, in whose house he abides continually, who see him go in and out day after day? How then should I not waste away, or keep from languishing on account of him? And the women spake, saying, It is true. Who can look upon this beauty in the house and refrain her feelings? But he is your slave. Why do you not disclose to him that which is in your heart, rather than suffer your life to perish through this thing? Zuleika answered them, Daily do I endeavor to persuade him, but he will not consent to my wishes. I promised him everything that is fair, yet have I met with no return from him, and therefore I am sick, as you may see. Her sickness increased upon her. Her husband and her household suspected not the cause of her decline, but all the women that were her friends knew that it was on account of the love she bore Joseph, and they advised her all the time to try to entice the youth. On a certain day, while Joseph was doing his master's work in the house, Zuleika came and fell suddenly upon him, but Joseph was stronger than she, and he pressed her down to the ground. Zuleika wept, and in a voice of supplication and in bitterness of soul she said to Joseph, Have you ever known, seen, or heard of a woman my peer in beauty, let alone a woman with beauty exceeding mine? Yet I try daily to persuade you. I fall into decline through love of you. I confer all this honor upon you, and you will not hearken unto my voice. Is it by reason of fear of your master that he will punish you? As the king lives, no harm shall come upon you from my master on account of this thing. Now therefore, I pray, listen to me, and consent unto my desire for the sake of the honor that I have conferred upon you, and take this death away from me, for why should I die on account of you? Joseph remained as steadfast under these importunities as before. Zuleika, however, was not discouraged. She continued her solicitations unremittingly, day after day, month after month, for a whole year, but always without the least success, for Joseph, in his chastity, did not permit himself even to look upon her, wherefore she resorted to constraint. She had an iron shackle placed upon his chin, and he was compelled to keep his head up and look her in the face. Wow. I'm going to stop there, guys. Lord willing, we're going to read the rest tomorrow night. Joseph resists temptation. And then again, if we have, depending on how the night goes as well, we'll see if we can get into the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker and Joseph's miraculous salvation from prison, if you will. And so lots to talk about. Joseph is such an interesting story. So much awesome stuff here. So much detail here in the Legends of the Jews that we don't have in the canonical scriptures, that's for sure. Okay, guys, so that'll be it for tonight. If you haven't already, please leave a like. Please subscribe and follow if you're not already. Craig says the Joseph stories are my absolute favorite. All right, yes, they're really good. They're very, very good. So much to be, so much to learn from the story of Joseph. Absolutely, thank you, Craig. Going nowhere says, sleep well, everyone. I'll be on guard. Okay, you're the night watchman. Blessings, blessings. Multiply to you, going nowhere. Okay, guys. As always, keep on calling on him, and he will show you great and mighty things. Jeremiah 33:3. You guys are amazing. So, tomorrow is music night already. Tomorrow's music night again, all right? And we'll be doing some live music tomorrow, and then on Sundays, or Saturdays, of course, and Sunday, our drummer Victor will be doing a drumathon to raise some money for a new symbol of his. Actually, I got it here. This was a symbol that he was using so far. It was a little bit overused, but yeah, so on Sunday afternoon, he's going to bless you guys with a drum solo. And yeah, all right. I look forward to that. That'll be Sunday afternoon, I think around 3 o'clock Eastern. Of course, that night we'll have the regular live stream as well at 7:30 p.m., as well as every night. Craig says, thank you, Christopher. Blessings to you guys and your families. Thank you very much, Craig. Blessings, blessings multiplied back to you. Have a wonderful, wonderful night. Going nowhere says, man, I wish I was good looking so ladies would drool over me. Okay. Well, you never know. Pray like Joseph prayed. There you go. And believe like Joseph believed, and obey like Joseph would obey. There you go, going nowhere. Chipmunk says, thank you for the study. God bless you all much. Thank you, Chipmunk. Blessings multiplied back to you and your family. Blessings, blessings. Okay, we'll see you guys tomorrow. As always, love you guys, and I pray the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face to shine upon you, lift up his countenance upon you, and give you wonderful, wonderful shalom. Amen, amen. We'll see you guys tomorrow.